Living willow structures add a lot of beauty and character to your landscape, and they are super easy to build. Today I'm going to share how we built our 16-foot diameter willow dome here at our permaculture site in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Maryland. I'm Michael Judd. Usually I'm talking about food forests and edible landscapes, fruits and nuts, but today I'm going to go into another one of my loves, which is the willow. And there are so many types of willows to explore. So let's jump into showing you how to build a willow dome. All right, so first, where do you site your willow structure? Ideally, you do it in full sun. You're going to get full growth. You're going to get that lush look if you can do this in full sun. If you do it in partial light, you're going to get, not as lush and full of growth. And then, of course, in the shade, I wouldn't even bother. You're not going to get what you're hoping for with a living willow structure there. Soil-wise, there are many different types of willows. There are over 400 species of willows and many hybrids of those species. So there's almost a willow for every location in the temperate world. Generally speaking, the fast-growing, lush willows like a moist soil, not wet, but moist. And that can be achieved with doing lots of mulch, which I encourage no matter what your soil type is when working with willows. But something that drains well but holds moisture is out of strong winds. If you have strong winds, I would recommend doing a windbreak with willows first and then planting your living willow structure on the leeward side of that. So ideally, you're getting a place that has decent soil, moisture, and wind protection to start. Now, what type of willows do you begin with? Well, like I said, there's many choices. The one species that I find to do really well is called Maya Biena, and it is a species I think it's originally from Japan. It's very fast growing. It's used a lot in research for biomass growing. There's a huge range. There's males and females. Now the male willows are the ones that put out the big pussy willows, the big flowers. So if you have a choice and you're wanting the flowers to add into your landscape, which I do recommend because they're huge pollinators, early season, great resource to have. So think about that in your choosing. What I use on our site, we're in Frederick, Maryland, foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains of Maryland. We're about zone 6B7. We use a cultivar called Winter's Glory. And we got this originally from Vermont Willow, which is a great resource for getting your different willow cuttings from. And they're up in Vermont. They're probably zone 4. So I believe that this will grow, from quite cold down into the warmer climates. Is a good choice. But do your research and find out what is a fast-growing, good living willow for your region. And again, sites like Vermont Willow and other willow purveyors that sell the cuttings for you will be able to tell you a little bit of their range and whatnot. This one's wonderful. It's quite disease resistant, which is important to us. Our site is a little bit stagnant, which is great for a lot of things. A lot of things we grow love that, but it can funk out certain plants. So make sure that you're getting something that's going to be ideally disease resistant as well. And then ideally you're getting your rods in advance. You can start to collect or purchase them in the fall when things go dormant, or I like to harvest mine at the very end of winter. Right for us, that would be sort of end of February. Right before they wake up, I cut my rods and then I can stick them straight into the ground and they root. Willows are wonderful for that. They're one of the easiest things you'll learn to grow. So willow domes, also sometimes called willow temples, as is this one up in the Shivananda Yoga Ranch in New York, where I lived on and off for a number of years, built this structure. And you can see this is beautiful. This is probably only 2 years after being created. Now I'm going to discuss the difference between having deer and not having deer, because it will make a difference, certainly aesthetically. At this site, there's no deer pressure. You can see how you have lush growth growing all the way up from the base. And you'll see in the dome that's at our place, at our permaculture site, we have lots of deer, and you'll see that they limit up for us, which is quite nice of them. But again, this is about second year. This is third year. So you can get remarkable growth and create these really magical spaces in a short amount of time. Now, the way that I have built my willow domes is by using a rebar, a metal infrastructure to train my willows along. Now, this is not necessary, but it does create a uniform look and structure and strength. So even though it's using resources, I think that if you want something that you know is going to sort of perform and look a certain way, then it's probably recommended to do that. And I'm going to talk about what materials you'll need for that. I just want to give you the visual here. And you can see that I'm usually starting with 8-foot whips. You know, willow, these whips can come anywhere. I mean, you could start with a 12-inch cutting, stick it 10 inches in the ground and let it grow up, and you train it like that, or you can jump start and you can do 8 foot. And if you have deer, that can be helpful. And they'll root and they'll start to grow right away, especially if you have decent soil and lots of mulch, as you can see here. All right, so rebar is one of the first things you're going to want to have to find. It's a little bit tricky because you're going to be using 17-foot lengths. And typically rebar is sold in, 20-foot lengths, that you're going to have to cut back to create a 16-foot diameter dome, which is what I'm going to be sharing how to do today. This is my brother and I years ago unloading the rebar. So these are notes that I'm also going to include down in the description, or if you're receiving this via an email, I'll make sure this information is attached. Basically, for a 16-foot diameter, that's 16 feet all the way across, dome, you're going to want 12 holes on 50-foot centers. So every 50 inches going around, you're going to be creating these 12-inch deep holes. Now, ideally, these holes are made so that they're not super wide. A post hole digger is really good because you want to maintain the integrity of the side of that wall. It's really going to help hold that rebar in place versus digging a big, wide, sort of open hole. It's going to make it harder for that rebar to stay in place. So dig a straight down hole, 12 inches. I mean, you can easily go a good 8 inches in diameter for that. Now, the trick that I've learned is to go ahead and, if I'm using a long willow stake, I'll go ahead and I'll put in about 4 or 5 inches of earth back into the hole. And I'll put my willow cutting in that, and it'll kind of hold it in place, just so it's kind of fixed there. Then I'll start sticking in my rebar, and that little bit of earth in the bottom helps hold it in place versus it just kind of moving all over the bottom of your hole if you don't have a little bit of that soil in there. 3/8 inch rebar is recommended. It's strong, but yet it's flexible. I built my first one with 1/2 inch, and it was doable, but it was a lot more work. It was a lot harder. Again, you're going to want 17 foot for you're going to cut back your rebar. A saw will do that. You need to get in there and you need to cut all those rebar to 17, and that'll help create the right dome shape for you. If you keep them at 20 feet, you're likely to get more of a flat top. And I'll explain that in a minute. So the rebar, that's going to be for the windows and the posts. At the very top, you're going to want to overlap 18 inches, and I'll show you that in a picture here in a minute. That overlap is really important for creating the shape of the top of the dome that you want. If you go more than that, you're going to start getting flat. You'll see there's a sweet spot there, and it's 18-inch overlaps. You're going to want the very top. This is optional. You can do 3 very short 6-inch sort of that little steeple piece at the top that'll be bent for 90 degrees, and again, I'll show you that. That's optional if you want. Ideally, you get help doing this. You're going to need at least 2 people. 3 is even better, and it's going to take you a little bit of time, but it's a lot of fun. It's a fun, creative project to do together. We had a lot of fun. In the design that I'm showing, all the openings, I'm calling them windows, are all going to be equal. I didn't change the size for the door to come in and out, though you could. If you decide you wanted a larger door opening, you could adjust 2 of those holes to be a little bit wider. but I found it simple and useful just to do them all the same. Your tools, like I mentioned, you're going to want metal ties for tying that rebar together. 2 ladders is ideal. Gloves, that extra rebar for the top piece. Plant ties, that's that stretchy green tape that's good to help tie on your willows onto the structure once you build it. Post hole digger, metal spikes and rope in case, and I'll explain that. That's in case it gets a little wonky and you need to help hold it in place while it grows in, which happened on our first one that we did. All right, many moons ago, this is my wife Ashley and I believe this was right when we were beginning to build our circular straw bale house, which this willow temple sits right outside of. So it's a great reflection of them. But we're just kind of joking and showing you here, the spacing of the holes. You see how square those holes are. It looks like we definitely probably needed a post hole digger, a strong shovel, and it looks like even a little piece of metal bar in case you got some really tough soil, but ideally your soil is pretty decent. This is pulling in the family. That's my mom in the foreground and my brother in the background. Now what we're doing here is we're pulling the post pieces. We put in the opposite post pieces, and pretty much my brother stood on the top of that ladder and would hold the pieces as I was bringing them to him, and we would loosely tie some rope around it, but really we're just kind of getting them all together before we tied it tight. And that overlap was what was key. You can see here I've got more than 18 inches, and I should have cut these back more because I would have gotten a little bit more of a dome versus a flatter top. So that's just showing you there that importance of that top. And there you can see that overlap, how it comes to the top. First I did the post pieces, which go all the way across in opposite orders. Then you're able to put in what are called these arches, what I call the windows. They'll go in more easily after you've got that top all secured and tied. Then you can come along and you can put those arches in one, bend it over and bring it down. That 17 foot will be perfect size for you to bring it down into that other hole and fix it. And that's where you're going to want to use your metal ties and tying this together. And as you do that, you're going to be strengthening and holding those long post pieces that went all the way over, and it kind of starts to secure itself. If you need to, as you're going along and putting these in, pack more earth in there to help hold them in place, do that, and so that they're staying firm for you. You can see our house there in the background, a circular straw bale house. Look, our site looks quite different now. It's quite lush and grown in from this. And there's that little steeple piece. Again, optional, kind of cool to do though, where you're just kind of bending 90 degrees and then having those go up and tie those together. Just kind of creates a cool look, but not needed. Over time, as your willow grows, it may not even be that obvious to you, but at the outset, it's pretty fun. This is a note to not drink too many beers while you're doing your willow dome, something we did not adhere to the first time we built ours, and that's where we got a little bit of the wonkiness of the structure, which was easily fixed by sort of tying a rope to a heavy-duty metal stake in the ground just to help hold it, because it was a little bit leaning to one side. So I just pulled it, and then as the willow grows in and everything starts to firm up, it's not needed. But just so you know, in case you drink too many beers or it just happens, right? This is that tie tape I was telling you about. I love the stuff. I use it in so much of my work on our site with plants. And it stretches, so as the plant grows, it doesn't restrict it, which is really helpful to your plants. All right, whoops. We got a little delay here. Let me come back. This is the temple during its first growing season. So I just tied the long stakes to the original posts, and then I'm letting them grow up for the first season. Just let them get their growth going before I then begin to train them, holding them, tying them down. And ideally, I usually do this during the dormant season, during the winter. In this picture, I must have been a little behind, still building the house. It was still fine to do, but then, I'm pulling it down and I'm tying it to those long posts, and then I'm bringing branches and I'm bringing them over those arches, and I'm plant tying those onto that, so that I'm basically following the structure. And then, so here's a little bit obvious when I pulled it down, and then it's going to start sprouting up. After you've got it held down, it's going to start sprouting up. That's not a problem. That's what's going to happen. Here it is, probably in year 4, where we've just tied it down. We pruned it because we get a lot of cuttings off of this, which is wonderful, because then you'll have cuttings to build new living structures, fences, arches, all kinds of material. You could sell them after this. You're also creating a wonderful propagation. This willow, like many of these willows, are good for what's called coarse weaving. You can create, wattle and daub. You can create hurdles, which is a woven garden fence. You can do really cool art with these, landscape art. I love them. I use them for lots of stuff. It's actually a pretty decent weaver, the winter's glory, and Mayabiena species in general. Now, this, like I said, will start to sprout up, and that's fine. It's going to sprout for the season. Ours now sprouts and shoots, 8 to 12 feet, because it's very happy. It's very well mulched. I want you to, again, pay attention to see how much mulch I have. I actually mulch the whole area beyond and inside. I'm just helping maintain good soil and moisture holding there, and this thrives without other inputs. Okay, so I want to touch on, I'm going to talk about arches. This is actually a 60-foot tunnel that I've created here at our site, and it's actually full of different type of weaving species. So things that aren't going to grow quite as vigorous, I'm going to make a tighter tunnel. But we have a lot of deer, and I want to point out that if you have a lot of deer, I recommend using plantra tree tubes. They are a new generation of tree tubes, whether this is for your fruit trees, your nut trees, your willows, whatever. They make things grow wonderfully. They're really well, intelligently designed, very, very functional, different than a lot of the past tree tubes. And so this is great for deer, especially if you're starting with a smaller cutting. You could do this after you created your dome and you've got your cutting in there. Maybe your cutting's maybe you only got a 12-inch cutting, and you only have 2 inches of that cutting sticking out of the ground, because you want to bury a good 10 inches or so of your cutting, no matter what size it is. But if it's a little 12-inch cutting, then you can go ahead and just put a planter tree tube over it. Have your structure in place, your rebar in place, but then put your planter tree tube over it. Let it get to grow out of that, and then eventually you can take the top part and start to weave it over. And you can either take the tree tube off, or I would actually recommend leaving it on, because deer, even after a tree is out of reach, if it's like 3 or 4 years old, they'll come and rub their horns on it and they'll kill it. And they like to rub on the willows on the temple. So what I usually do, Plantra also has another product that's just like it's like a woven plastic that's like it's just like a black plastic woven that you can just sort of attach over the trunk, so they can't rub on it. It's not as visual and large as a planter tree tube. So you might start with a planter tree tube, and then you might switch to the mesh. Just know that you want to keep protecting your willows, not only from the reach of their eating, but from the rubbing of their horns. Okay. Again, planter tree tube, love them. I'll put a link, if you're watching this on YouTube, down below for the planter tree tubes that I recommend. And if you're receiving this via an email, I'll include that information for you as well. Big fan of the planter tree tubes. Okay, let's see. Got a delay going here. So let's talk about building a willow arch, right? So a willow arch can be any length. Like you saw, I'm doing one 60 foot. I guess it becomes a tunnel at that point. But typically speaking, an arch is something that you can do over an entryway. And it's a nice passage, to go through. And it really gives you a sense of transformation from going one place to the next. It could be actually just a couple of willows going right over a gate. Or in this case, I've got about 6 feet on either side of this gate, so that you're actually walking through. Very simple, much more simple than a dome, because you don't need the metal structure. You could use the metal structure to do this as well, but I've found them to work really well because they're not so dynamic. You want to come down a good 12 inches in your soil, and ideally 12 inches wide, because you want to create a nice soil growing environment there. Instead of just sticking them in the grass, which is really going to make them struggle, ideally you're preparing that soil, loosening it up, potentially putting in a nicer compost soil mix into this, and then sticking your cuttings in. but you're just doing this 12-inch wide, 12-inch deep. You can see we started with, a good 10, almost 12-foot lengths here. Again, my favorite, Winter's Glory. Put in these lovely beds and, really watered in, really, really good soil there. And then we went ahead, and since they were tall enough, we wove them in one go. Now, if they weren't tall enough, I'd let them go a full year, just do their thing, and then I'd come back the next year and I would weave them in. But these were tall enough to go, so we were able to create an arch right from the beginning, again, using plant tie. And as you overlap, that overlap is what's going to create sort of the structure, that top, that doming is really going to depend on how much you're overlapping. So keep an eye on that, stay consistent. And then I also like to put in horizontal pieces, whether it's another piece of willow, where I'll tie that horizontally, maybe about waist height, just to help hold all those verticals together and evenly spread apart. That's actually a very helpful. You could do maybe 2 of those. You could do one even higher, and that's just going to give it more rigidity and keep everything evenly spaced. Let's see. This is up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, near where I live, which is absolute heaven, on a site that I did a huge agroforestry planting on, fruits and nuts and hazelnuts, all kinds of stuff. But around the house, I was like, hey, let me do some willows, because I just love doing them. So look, that was easy to do. This was a number of hours, and then it just transforms. This is at our house. This is at our place. That's my little girl, Jaya, and this is a taller arch. Again, Winter's Glory, same design as the one I just showed you, just a little bigger. I let it go a little taller, and it's the entrance to one of our food forests, which is absolute heaven. And when you go through that, you're feeling that you're definitely going into a new space. So it creates a transformative experience planting these. And I'm actually going to plant and grow a hurdle that comes out on this using some of the willow cuttings. So lots to play with on this. If you're curious about more of what I'm doing, check out my first book, Edible Landscaping with a Permaculture Twist. It's a wonderful how-to on creating a landscape that's super abundant, low input, straight to the point. That, as you can see, that's the way I like to teach, is some of the easy to grow fruits, how to start harvesting water on your landscape passively, hugelkultur beds, even how to build earthen ovens so you can enjoy all that wonderful abundance that you're growing. I'm also the author of For the Love of Pawpaws, one of the most amazing fruits on the planet. It's tropical fruit that grows in the north. There's nothing like it. This book really goes through it all, beautiful pictures. And it's also really helpful to understand how to be growing all manner of fruit trees on your landscape. It helps set up the stage regardless of what you're growing, but a lot of fun. Pawpaws are amazing. They are really worth exploring and growing if you have the right climate. Again, our place here in the Blue Ridge Mountains is absolutely amazing for what you can come and learn from. We have events through the year. We do mushroom workshops, mushroom growing workshops. We have a wonderful pawpaw festival. We have great opportunities to come and learn from actually seeing our site and coming and seeing our willow structures and domes, and such a cornucopia of things to experience here. So I encourage you to check out our website and come and see when you can come visit us and see these things in person, because that really helps. YouTube channel is another place to keep up on what I'm doing with my willows. What are some of the new structures? What are some of the new creations? So follow my channel for not just willows, but a little bit of everything that I'm up to. It's a great learning opportunity. And again, this is where you can find me, ecologiadesign.com. Both my YouTube channel and my Instagram handle are at Permaculture Ninja. So I look forward to joining and sharing on those platforms. And have happy growing, everybody. Just go for it. That's always the trick. See ya.